Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast. Hey there, Karma Crew. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Mind Your Own Karma, the Adoption Chronicles. Today's adoptee story is told by Jacquelin Taybron. And when I asked Jacquelin for a bio for today's episode, she sent me, "I'm a rootin' tootin' straight dope shootin' unfiltered freak of nature." And she is just that. So I hope you enjoy my interview with Jacquelin Taybron. So Mind Your Own Karma is welcoming Jackie to the show today. Hi, Jackie.
Hi there. How are you?
I am good. I'm super excited to talk about some of these things that we're going to talk about today. I think we're going to blow some minds. So super interesting. You're going to educate all of us, including me. So, but first, I just wanted to ask, why do you want to tell your story?
Well, I think that I never thought about what kind of an impact it makes until I actually started participating on other platforms with other adoptees. And even though there are a bunch of us, everybody's story and experiences have been very different. And you just never know what part of your story is going to trigger other questions or people, oh, I never thought about that, or I didn't know about that. And we learn from each other. And so I think I I heard Robin Roberts one time say, let your mess be your message.
Yes,
And so you never know what part of your story can inspire or heal. And I think it's worth sharing.
definitely.
Yeah.
So let's put a foot in one of your shoes and tell us
Okay, sure.
tell us about your adoption circumstances. What do you know?
Well, all of my parents knew each other, which was very interesting. And I am 29. Well, actually, this year is 30 years for me in reunion. I was 29 years old when I met my biological mother again and my siblings. And I had no idea that I had siblings. It didn't even cross my mind when I made contact with her that I had siblings. And I'm like, oh
Mm.
my goodness. And yeah, and so my adoptive parents knew about all of this, and I didn't know any of this until, 30 years ago. So, um,
So
but
growing
yeah,
up, you didn't know that your parents knew each other, the
I had no
bio and the.
idea. I didn't know that was I think I knew everything that I was curious about, except for that my father's identity, my father's true identity, and the fact that they all knew each other. Those were the things that I found out when I was 29 years old
And where were
in
you born?
in Germany, in Landstuhl, Germany. And what was interesting is my biological mother, still lived in the same place that she lived when I was born.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, so when I decided to look her up because I had information for that I had gathered over the years, and never really acted on it. I'm not really sure why, but I just I think I felt well loved and all of that. I just never felt compelled to really search. To me, I'm such an info junkie. I think just having knowledge sometimes was enough for me. And but at the moment, at the point, I think when I had a family of my own and I actually became a mother, that's when
Mm,
certain things started to surface because
yeah.
I'm doing things inherently differently than were done for me and
Wow.
to me. And so and I think that was the impetus for me being a particular type of parent. As a matter of fact, I know it was. So that's when things started to bubble to the surface, and I started asking more questions. And then, but my point is that I had all of this information, and the night that it was necessary to make contact, because I obviously was venting. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning here, and my husband was tired of listening. He was like, "Where's that folder? I'm going to make a phone call." And he had my mother on the phone in like 15 minutes. It was that kind of
Oh my
just
gosh.
amazing kind of situation. And mind you, this was all before we had no, I mean, I think that was a couple of years before we had a computer at home. You know what I mean? So it was, it's amazing that I just had information that I had written down when I was like 17 years old and working at the Library of Congress when I had access to the world's information.
Wow.
That was when I started. And then, of course, once I got older and moved here to Carolina and started having a family of my own, I would spend Sunday dinners with my dad and his wife because after my folks split up, so I was born in Germany. We came stateside actually the day after my adoption was finalized. So I was about 15 months old. And I had already been spending time with this family off and on. So I was never in an orphanage. My mother handpicked this family for me because she was working. My biological mother was also a military wife, and she was working amongst other military wives in Germany.
Mhm.
And at that time, she lived in Kaiserslautern or K-Town, and most military men in the 50s and 60s went through that area. So I think it was conversation, normal conversation. And I think wives in those situations tend to cling to each other and have
Mhm.
lots of conversations and stuff. And that was how it was, discussed that she had a child that she wanted to place. And the German and the American governments were definitely pushing that agenda anyway.
Really?
I have since met lots of brown babies, as we were called, German brown babies. Uh, Mädchenskinder is what it is, was the terminology for it. And there
Mm.
was really no place in Germany for these brown babies. So of course, the idea was we would prefer that military families would adopt these children. So this was handled, quickly because this was the ideal situation. So I was in one home and the mother got sick with polio and she had a governess come in and my mother found out about it and was like, this is not what I want
Mm.
for her. She wanted a nuclear family for me. And so she rehomed me herself. I mean, it's a it's something that we don't talk about in this country, but it happens a lot,
Wow.
and it's typically done very poorly as well too. But yeah, so that's what happened, and so as soon and shortly after we got back here, like a year and a half after we got stateside, my adoptive parents were divorced. So
Mm.
and so of course my biological mother didn't find this out either until 29. I mean, so there were a lot of,
Yeah.
there was a lot of unresolved issues going on at that time. And thank goodness for me, I was already like 4 or 5 years into a life coach at that point, so I was at least,
You were equipped a little
I
bit.
was equipped a little bit to dodge some of the fires and to choose my battles wisely and
Nice.
recognize which ones
Mhm.
were me, because I was innocent in all of that.
Yeah.
It was kind of difficult to watch my parents have to, deal with this new information because I'm sure my adoptive parents never thought in a million years when they got on that plane that this would ever be an issue again, and I think it was very shocking to everyone involved,
Yeah.
so yeah.
When did you find out you were adopted?
Um, in It was a funeral, and it was around 1969, 1970, and my adoptive family is biracial and African American, American Indian. I was head and shoulders taller than most of the women and some of the men, and at this funeral, it was the very first time that I recognized, like I looked like my grandmother only because we had the same complexion, but we didn't
Mm.
really look the same. But I didn't look like anybody else in the family. And that night, my mom and I were in the bathroom, and I asked her, and my mom told me.
And how old were
So
you?
I was about 5,
Oh, wow.
but I was always a precocious kid, and I think my mom told me what she felt I could deal with, the what uh, as much of the truth as but she definitely told me that I was adopted and helped me understand what that meant and all that kind of stuff. But I was so in love with my mom at that point, that I would tell her stuff that, even if we were walking down the street and I saw you on the other side of the street and I was with my mom, I would say I would want her to be my mom, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, she was really my person and
Mhm.
stuff. So I didn't, like I said, I was much older in my life, probably needing different types of support emotionally myself, especially by the time I became a mother,
Mhm.
before I ever really thought, because like I said, I was just collecting information along the way, like some type of, you know, um, strange stories and oddities and stuff like that, like abstract information. It really didn't have anything to do. I think I had compartmentalized things into such a way that this was just information that was of interest to me that really
Yeah.
had no bearing on my life until it meant everything, you
Right.
know. And so yeah, that was it was very interesting. But like I said, my mom she was living in the same place that she lived in. So when at the time, I can't remember what it was called, high seas or something. It's like the international 911.
Mm.
And when we made contact with them, there were 3 telephone numbers that they gave us, and the second number was my mother's number. So it
Oh,
was
wow.
very easy to find her.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
probably had
So,
the same phone number the whole time too.
yeah, probably. I'm assuming like I said, it wasn't difficult to find her, and so yeah, it was quite interesting.
Did you grow
But
up an only child?
I know I have a brother, and my brother is 5 years older than I, and he is also adopted, but he's
Okay.
adopted domestically, and so like my in my father's family was from Fayetteville, so that he was stationed at Fort Bragg, and my brother was a ward of the state, and my mother was a nurse at the time, and during those times, usually in cities like that, there would not have been any formal orphanage, and a child that is a ward of the state usually needs to have some type of medical or psychological attention, and is usually held at the hospital. So that's how those paths, crossed
Mhm.
and stuff. So they actually got me my father's second tour in Germany, because by that time my mom was working over there. She was driving the school bus um, for exceptional children and stuff. So they were, quite the cosmopolitan kind of family,
Yeah.
and so they definitely were. I mean, it was community. I mean, they were just huge, um, you know, um, contributors to, in their communities, that kind of thing, even abroad and here, so they were
Mhm.
both well known and popular and well liked and all of that, so it made sense. I don't think anyone ever thought anything, as a matter of fact, one of the largest lies my father ever told was that I was the product of his relationship with a German woman. That's my
Really?
my adoptive father. Yeah, so of course, that was the other thing that surfaced. I mean, that he had to deal with when I made contact with my mother.
Right.
So because shortly after my folks split, my father got married again, so of course I had relationships with his
Mhm.
wife and their children. I mean, my sisters, they were born when I was in high school. So, after a bit, the lies just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and,
Right.
yeah. So,
So, how do you see growing up, maybe even when you had your kids or in relationships, how did you see adoption shaping you? When you found out you were adopted, did it bother you or?
no, I felt, I don't know, I always felt kind of different. And I think because I spent a lot of time my and see, when my mom left my dad, it was a situation where she didn't want him to know where she was.
Mm.
So he came home for lunch the day after the thing happened, whatever the thing was, and we were gone.
Wow.
And she took me and left my brother behind.
Oh my goodness.
My brother was 8 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, so yeah, so I never I really didn't understand any of that or the weight of it until I was probably a tweener,
Yeah.
a little older. Because then I started after, I mean, you don't start thinking about anybody else's feelings until you're about 7 or so, you know what I mean? So I really don't think I thought about
Yeah.
what it meant to my brother until I started seeing letters that he would write my mom, and stuff like that. Or I would go away to camp and would write my mom letters, and then I would see my letters in her little drawer of treasures, and then I would see the letters
Mhm.
that my brother, and I'm like, wow, I like, you know what I mean? Like I can't imagine as a mom what that, like I couldn't, my son at 35 years old, if I were to disappear or something, he'd be like tearing up the town looking for me, so I can't imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I really my mom led a particular life too. She was already by the time she separated from my dad, she was in her early 40s, that kind, and so still uh, during that time, I mean, now that I think about it, my mom struck out on her own without a husband right around the time that women still had to have their husband's permission to take money out of the bank.
Mm.
You know what
Wow.
I mean? And to
Yeah.
start, and so she actually changed her profession and everything and like started all over again. And she went to DC. I mean, she left North Carolina, and my dad was still looking, thinking that, my mom had gone home to her mother's or one of her sisters, and neither of those things were true. And,
What
it
was
was
your
too,
understanding about why you
I,
guys
I,
left?
I don't think I had an understanding. It was, honestly, my entire life has been like an adventure. You know what I mean? And this was just another trip we're taking.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
remember very few things. I remember the train station that night. I remember getting to my mom's girlfriend's house. So this was someone that she knew when they were both nurses at the same hospital in Fayetteville.
Mm.
And so she had, but she was from DC or Maryland, and that's where she went back to because I think her husband was in the military as well. And I remember it was right after Christmas because her daughter still had her the little metal refrigerator with the painted ketchup bottles and stuff on the door. You remember those old? And I remember, so it was right after Christmas. That year. So I had scant memories of the activity, but not really any more of that. I mean, I've not ever had adults in my life that spoke in front of me in of another adult or what was going on. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
and in a lot of ways, a lot of things didn't get discussed because that was the way things were handled. But I was also shielded from lots of things. So I never heard anything about disgruntled adults or anything like that. And I didn't hear um, the stories about my dad coming to look for me and my grandmother like she's not like
Wow.
and here's the butt end of my gun, please, go, you know what I mean, kind of thing. I didn't hear about those things until I was an adult, and I'm like, wow, wow, grandma did that for me, like wow. But you know what I mean. So I didn't hear any of those things until way after the fact. So I was really oblivious. Um, but I brought that up to say by the time we got to once I got to elementary school and settled in DC and stuff, my mother's life was very different, and she lived a life where she didn't really want to bring a lot of attention to herself. I mean,
Mm.
people knew that she was a single mother, but I don't think there was any conversation about because we looked nothing alike. I mean, it was obvious like wow, that's your daughter. You know what I mean? Kind of,
Yeah.
and there was just my mother lived her life in such a way that she was really kind of beyond reproach, and like nobody's going to question this woman.
Mhm.
She was good at what she did. She went right into Superior Court and was like the courtroom stenographer and stuff. I mean, she was a phenomenal person. She typed like 142 words a minute. You
Oh
know
my
what I
God.
mean? I mean, just,
Mhm.
and so it was, she was just a wonderful person. She was just, she was just good at whatever she chose to do and was held in high regard. Both of my mothers were in that respect, so there were a lot of commonalities between the two of them, which I found interesting once I got to meet my biological family. Um, but yeah, there was I don't know. I really felt um I don't know that I had any real feelings about the adopted thing. I think I had more the issues of the fact that I was treated as if I were different, regardless. If I had not been an adopted child and still raised by my biological, I mean my adoptive mother,
Mhm.
if she were my mother, regardless, just based on the woman that she was, I still would have been treated as if I were different,
Yeah.
just because she was struggling with her own oppressed feelings and things like that. I mean, the unresolved issues of her own childhood,
Yeah.
and those are the things that I spent a lot of time on trying to understand everybody in every family that I was part of, and how they interacted with me and how that made me feel and how I needed to navigate my relationships with them. Um, so yeah, I think I think there was more of an issue of feeling uh, maybe not because my mother was an introvert, and I mean, my adopted mother was an introvert and was very antisocial in a lot of ways. And I like my privacy because I am a true empath. So of course I need to take time
Mhm.
away after but I can be very social and stuff, but I'm selectively social, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I feel very differently about it.
Yeah.
I don't feel antisocial at all,
Mhm.
because I do like people, but then there are times when I just have to shut it off,
Right.
and make sure that I'm in tune that like, okay, all of this is mine and that's somebody else's feelings, but these are mine here.
Yeah.
Um, but I just there were I think that made more of an impact, just because I had a friend tell me a few years ago, and I was thinking about this today when I was preparing myself emotionally for this interview.
Mhm.
Um, but I was talking, venting about something about my mom and my adoptive mother and my girlfriend who called me Miss Jackie, and I think she did it for effect when she really wanted me to pay attention.
Right.
And she was like, "You know what, Miss Jackie?" She said, "Your mother ruined you a long time ago." And I was like, "What? Wow." I mean, because it was a tough pill for me to swallow.
Mhm.
But I understand too the people that know me and have seen me with my mother and have seen our relationship through the years, and so this is someone that I trust, that she knows exactly what she's seeing, and she's very real about her interaction with me over the years as well too. So I trusted her feedback, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was just like, I get what you're saying because I know that there were some things about my life that where she enabled me instead of being supportive,
Mm.
and those kinds of things. But I appreciate that too because those are definitely
Yeah.
areas that can always be improved. So,
Well, you kind of
but
were talking about how, you looked so different. So when you did introduce your mom, this
mm,
is my mom, and you see those wheels turning in people's heads trying to make sense of it. How
yeah.
does that feel when,
Um, yeah, I think the one time that it was real every year, I was a Girl Scout very early, like 6 years old was probably the first time I went away to resident camp. And so that's 2 weeks away, and every summer. Plus, I went to day camp during the week. I mean, during the school year, whatever. But I remember one time, it, I don't know, I was probably 12 years old, and you would all meet up at some mall parking lot and catch the bus, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So this was at the end of camp, and there were about 5 or 6 of us that were still waiting for our rides home. And of course, this is a hugely, international group of folks too, and where I went to camp was in Northern Virginia, or in the mountain. Well, we would meet in Northern Virginia. And so of course, my mom always made sure that I just ate and slept in our community. I didn't go to school in our community. I didn't hang out.
Mm.
If it was more than a weekend, I was in Carolina with my grandparents. I mean, my mother was very cautious about what I was exposed to, and I appreciate that. Um, but I remember when my mom drove up, and she had just gotten it. So this, yeah, she had just gotten this new car, and my mom was she was very mod, she was very trim. She was like 115 pounds and was always smartly dressed, like, just like Laura Petrie, you know what I mean, that kind of. And she always had a really refined presence and stuff, so she was always very poised when she was driving. And I remember seeing her car coming across the parking lot, and I was like, "Oh, that's me," So I'm grabbing my duffel bag and stuff, and they were like, "Oh, Jackie, is that your nanny?"
Wow.
And I was like, "Wow!" Like, so here again, I've been at camp all summer with these girls, and they started saying, "Oh, so that's why her," because by that time my hair was probably waist length and probably just in a big twist or something, and they were like, "Oh, so that's why she tans that way," and that's why, you know what I mean? So I'm hearing these conversations. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, wow, because they really don't even know the backstory. They just know what they see. So it's
Mm.
it has, I don't know. I think it always surprised me. You know what I mean? Because I like never see it coming, because that's never what's
Right.
typically on my mind,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I think it's always kind of surprised me. I mean, even through high school, I mean, I was I felt so much more mature than
Mm.
my peers, and they were thinking of, what do high school girls think of, and I went to all girls Catholic school in DC, so
Oh my gosh.
yeah, and it was a whole different type of pressure, and I don't think, I was always surprised when, when I'd hear, "Oh, someone was talking about you," or "Somebody doesn't want you going over to that school with us because you got this and that." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, well, I never saw myself the way other people did,
Yeah.
and I mean, my head was always somewhere else, and I always felt so much. I mean, I think I was probably on the third or fourth iteration of my life as a person by the time I got to
Mm.
high school. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I wasn't thinking about what other high school girls think about,
Right. Right.
I felt like I had already lived several lives, and that this was just part of the journey, and I need to get a piece of paper from here so I can go on and do something else. You know what I mean? It was really the way I felt about it, I'm sure, so but
Yeah. So
at
you
any rate,
alluded earlier that your husband got on the phone and
yes.
found your birth mother. So let's pick up there. What happened?
Well, first of all, okay, my mother, she really, now she survived Hitler's Germany. My mother, lived in Germany, never left. She grew up there, never left at all. I mean, she came here for a while, but that was before I was born. My next oldest sister's father was from Detroit, and that's the man that she was still married to when I was born. So
Mm.
it's his name that's on my birth certificate.
Okay.
So when you talk about all of the shenanigans that go on with so so that's the name that we're rolling with, because that's the legal father. So now we've got to get, this is her estranged husband. When by the time I came along, they hadn't been
Mm-hmm.
together for more than a year, but they need to have his permission. Um, on a document to relinquish his parental rights in order for the adoption to occur.
Okay.
So I even have those letters where he's saying, yeah, no, that baby is not mine. I can't give you permission. And then my mother sent another plea, my adopted mother, please, we need to have this or we can't do, and so eventually he did write a letter that was very carefully worded,
Mm.
but he gave his wife permission to, to put me up for adoption. So I have those letters, like 6 copies of that, the original stuff, right, in a military folder.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, it's just amazing. But anyway, so getting back to the phone call, my mother, again, had survived the things that she had survived and not survived some other things. She was never able to, she had 4 daughters. I'm the youngest. Um, so there were 2 of us that she put up for adoption and 2 that she raised.
Mm.
So life was very, very difficult and challenging for all of them
Yeah.
as I uh, grew to find out. But so, because of all that she had already gone through, um, my mom was not really, she didn't believe that because it was my husband that made the phone call. So she's thinking that he's actually the husband of my next oldest sister because she was here with him. He was stationed in the States at that time. And so she lived here and she assumed that's who it was on the phone for a hot second. And then
Mm-hmm.
he was like, no, no, you have a daughter named Jacqueline. And then I was listening on the other end at that time. And that's when she broke down and was like, yes, I do.
Wow.
And yeah, and so we talked for a long time. I was a chemist at the time, and so I didn't like the next day for almost like 2 weeks. I went to work and did 8 hours worth of work in 2 hours and would just kind of veg out for the rest of the day because my life was really different after that. I was like in some parallel universe,
Mm-hmm.
trying to make sense of all of this stuff because now all of this stuff that I had compartmentalized, now it's true, and I had answers to by that time I probably only had like 2 questions for her, and um, so and one of them was like, what's my dad's name? And she's just like,
Yeah.
how do you know what your dad's name is? And that's when she let me know the stuff that she left me with. I left you with a bag. I left you with this. I left you with that. And then so of course she and my adoptive mother at some point within the coming months had a discussion,
Yes, they
because
did.
and I left the room, you know what I mean? Because I was like,
Yes, I do.
I felt badly.
I
I
would have
felt
too.
badly that the conversation had to happen. I felt badly for my biological mother because I mean my adoptive mother because I felt I grew to find that I was really taking care of her emotionally, you know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and probably always had been. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like I needed to protect her. But I recognize that, yeah, no, you got to handle this yourself. This is your doing, and you need to be held accountable for this. You know what I mean? So I just walked out of the room because I they needed to have that moment, and I didn't need to be part of it. But yeah, it was kind of sticky because apparently there were promises made about, that both women wanted to do this well, but
Yeah.
but by and large they did not have the support from their families or their communities or the government to do anything differently,
Mm-hmm.
and so both of them were very enterprising women. They both wanted to have businesses of their own. Like my adoptive mom did all kinds of things. I mean, she was a whirlwind when she was with my dad, but then the things that she did after she left my dad, you know what I mean? The things that I did with her, it was just nothing short of amazing. I mean, she lived her life in a way and was completely unapologetic about it, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I um and and my biological mother too, I mean, wanted to do things that she wasn't capable of doing. I mean, she just think of the things that well, here we were free to burn bras and say what we didn't like, and you know, to do some push pull whatever.
Yeah.
There, she couldn't. She wanted to, the thing that she wanted to do was she wanted to have a bed and breakfast, and
Mm.
she couldn't get a business loan because she didn't have a husband and
Oh
because
my
all
God.
she had was daughters and no sons.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and my grandmother was a Nazi sympathizer, so my sisters did not have an easy time with her,
Mm-hmm.
or my mom's side of the family. My grandfather loved them, but he was henpecked. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Well, what were
their
some of the
circumstances were very
things
different.
that you found out that you thought you knew that were not true?
Well, first of all, just not knowing, I didn't know that they all knew each other. That was a big deal. I did not know that. So, okay, so when I let because I didn't tell my family, my adoptive family, for about 90 days
Oh,
after I found my mom, because that was my information, and I wanted to make sense of it first, and
right.
it took me a while to deal with it because it's new and life is never the same again after that.
Yeah.
Um, but when I did, I mean, my mom didn't miss a beat. She was like, "Oh," so, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "So I made contact with Maria, and I said, and my sisters." And she's like, "Oh, I wonder how they've been all these years." You know? So I'm like, because my mother was the lady, I have lady-like tendencies, but I'm a woman to the bone. You know what I mean? So I'm not always concerned with ruffling feathers, and
Yeah.
I want to know why, and I want to know the truth, and I want to, because that's what's expected of me. You know what I mean?
And
So,
is that when you found out they knew each other
well,
in that moment or?
yeah, that's when I found out, because once my mother, Maria, my adoptive mother, my biological mother started to tell me how she, made that. She was just like, "Oh, well, I was working at the, I was working in the restaurant and the ladies, blah, blah, blah." I mean, when my mom came over for the first time, because we had our first conversation that year in July, and she said, "Then I'm going to come over for December," and she came and stayed for 3 months. I mean, because at that
Wow.
time I had two sisters here stateside, the oldest one and the next oldest one, because her husband, well, they both were military wives at the time, and and she said, "And I'll come and I'll stay a month with everyone." So I took a sabbatical from work and took the whole 90
Yeah.
days off, and stayed with her
Wow.
the whole time, pretty much.
Wow.
And yeah, because that was our moment, and I was gonna make use of it, and so yeah, I it that yeah, it was a lot. So I
Jumping right
found that.
in.
Yeah, I mean, I just it was kind of crazy. So when my oldest sister, she remembers, because we're almost to the date 10 years apart. So
Mm,
she remembers, she was like, "I remember when we took you there that day. I remember what you had on. I remember what you
wow.
smell like." She was like, "I remember what your mother cooked." It was the very first time that she had had pigs in a blanket, and she was like, "And I wished I was staying there with you."
Mm,
And the it yeah, it was even more of it was, I never even thought about, sometimes I feel very selfish for um how the first meeting was handled and everything, because my husband at the time had a friend that was a television producer, and his father had a local television show, it's sort of like a man on the street
mm-hmm.
kind of show, and he would highlight certain things going on in the community. And his dad asked to do a segment on the story. So there was a television crew at the airport.
Oh, wow.
And now, not that that was enough. my mom happened to be on a plane with kids coming back from Disney World, like a whole school of kids.
Oh my gosh.
So there was so much attention. And I remember my daughter, God love her, she was about 4.5 at the time, and her brother was like 2 years older and quite silly like boys are at that point. So he's just jumping around, just happy to be at the airport. But my daughter is like really paying attention
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, my sister's behavior and my behavior, because my sister and I had connected prior to our mother getting here. Um, and my daughter leaned over, because there was a lot of stuff going on,
Yeah.
She leaned over, she was just like, "Mommy, I don't ever want to get adopted," And I was like, "Don't worry about it, baby. It's not gonna ever happen to you." But it was quite a lot, and to say that, my mom really did not survive our reunion well.
Mm,
Um, and I always say that she survived Hitler's Germany, but her reunion with me, not so much. I mean, she cried the entire time she was here. Like and I don't think it was just me. I think it was just the choices that she made in her life, and that she was not able to forgive herself for the
mm,
choices that she made. And that's a sad thing when we, as the nurturers of nature, when because
yeah.
we cease to be in touch with, certain parts of our lives or humanity in general, when we can't be at peace with ourselves.
Yeah.
And she was just a sad person, and we did so much during that time. I mean, she had girlfriends that she was still friends with that married GIs, and they were still married and lived in DC, and we had them meet us for lunch. I mean, they were good friends a long time, decades earlier in Germany. And while we were uh, the broadcast made the news, the local news where the airport was, and
Yeah.
a woman called the airport. She was like, "Oh my God, I worked with her in Germany. I know that woman." And so someone else reached out to her, because of the broadcast while she was here and stuff. And she and lots of people, or some people, would have embraced all of that, but in for her it was more like a ripping of a bandage off of a wound that she
Yeah.
just
So
didn't want
overwhelming.
touched, didn't want, it was terrible for her. And
Mm,
even she was really apologetic to me, like her entire, and I just wanted to embrace her and stuff. I'm
yeah.
like, "You don't owe me any apology." I'm like, "I'm fine, I wanted to know you. I wanted to, and she just, I don't know, it was almost like she felt like she had to make up for something. And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, you don't need to do that. It's okay. I'm good, you're good, but yeah,
Yeah.
she was yeah, but
Well,
anyway,
let's change the subject a little bit.
sure.
I want you to educate us a little bit on this citizenship for international adoptees, and you participated in a roundtable with the U.S. State Department Child Welfare Office, where
Yes.
they were addressing this subject. So, tell us what happened to you, and maybe I didn't know this was even a thing, the
Yes.
citizenship.
Okay. So what happens, and now, mind you, that typically all of these or people that are in a situation like mine are typically during U.S. occupation at these countries. I mean, because during that, well, yeah, all of us boomers really from that same, yeah. So any from the 50s to the late 60s, late 40s, late mid 60s or whatever, that would have been around the time of World War II, and all of, when
Mhm.
the GIs were in a situation. But here's the deal: when I mentioned earlier, if you're just out of the country and you have a baby, you just fill out this document, and that's fine. If you also do that for an adopted child, and a lot of people didn't get that document, and then once you come stateside, when that child is 14. I think it's 14. It used to be 11, but I think it's 14. That's when you either get them a certificate of citizenship, or they become naturalized, one of the two
Mhm.
things. But the thing about that is that that has to happen within like the first 2 years. So it's not anything that an adult adoptee can find out and then go back and do for himself.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so then the very first time that these issues were brought forward, the rules were changed on the federal level, but it only affected children that were born after 1985. So it didn't
Wow.
affect any of us because most of our things are military connected. There's a lot of red tape there, for
Hmm.
whatever reason. Lots of, especially the folks in the Asian countries, it is illegal for them to even search. So they
Oh my
can't even
gosh.
ask, it's unfortunate. When we met on this round table, because there was, and I don't know, like I said, we all started talking. The very first group that I joined back in '09 would have been an international GI search if you had a parent that was in the military. So these are really search angels that had done a lot of stuff, and they knew how to, how to
Hmm.
where to find information and that kind of thing, and stuff. But so the reality is that if there's no one there to counsel the adults about,
Yeah.
if I'm in the military and my job is to get all these documents together, everything signed and stamped, and give you your folder and send you on your way, that's all I'm going to do. I'm not here to educate you. It's just like going to the clerk of court or
Hmm.
GNC. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
You have to know what you're going there for. You can ask for it when you get there, but you have to know why you need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the same thing. No one is gonna go out of their way, and lots of people on the front line don't even know. They know how to process the paperwork they are responsible for, or know how to collect the information they need to get new documents, procured or whatever. But
So were
they
you
don't
adopted through an agency or through the
know.
government or like
Uh-uh. No, no,
through
no,
the
because the only
government?
thing,
Like who?
yeah, the only thing that happens that's necessary is for some, so there's got to be a lawyer involved, and the parents have to relinquish rights, so this child can be adopted. But yeah, no, so
Okay.
I was never in an orphanage or anything. Now, I said there were two of us that were put up for adoption. My oldest sister was raised by my mother. The next one, which was Ophelia, who is 2 years younger than my older sister, was put in an orphanage.
Mm,
The third child, okay, so the first child was, she was an allowance. Okay, we will allow this to happen.
yeah.
Okay, so she can stay. The second child,
No.
okay, I cannot have this, so she's in the orphanage. The third child, well, there was a husband, you know what I mean? So that's a different situation. And then that didn't work out, and so then at any rate, and then I came along. So the middle child, I mean the other child, Ophelia, my mother actually thought that, I don't know, she had this, again, this is a woman under a lot of pressure, I can only imagine how her mental state
Yeah.
deteriorated over the years.
Mhm.
But my mother really thought that she was going to be able to have this child in the orphanage and come visit every Sunday. And that's how she was going to live with this. I'm thinking she had formal pictures taken with Ophelia, and by the time the pictures were developed, Ophelia was adopted.
Oh my gosh.
And so after, like, and we're talking decades later, after I met her, I was working, and I remember, and once I got to know her, I mean, I treated her just like I did my mom and my aunts and stuff. If I traveled for work, I sent postcards and stuff. And um, so one week I was, I don't know, I was in Florida for a few days, and then I had to go to Canada, but I came home for my son's birthday. And then a couple of days later, I was in Canada, so I sent my mom a, postcard, and she called me, and she was like, oh, are you okay? Are you she thought And I mean, it's a pass. I mean, the postcard is clearly, hey, I'm working and
Mm-hmm.
da 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 da. She was like, I thought you were looking for your sister. You were in Florida and then you were in Canada. I thought you, and I'm like, no, I'm working.
Oh.
Like she really had just, I have no idea what, what her life was like and what was going through her head and her heart all the time. And I still have like all the cards and stuff that she would send for Easter and, was almost apologizing for just not being
Mm.
able to travel and this and this and that. And
Did you ever
just,
find your sister?
no, and I've not ever. However, about 2 months ago, I got a notification from Ancestry because, of course, I did that a few years ago, and my biological father's family found me last year.
Oh, wow.
Year before last now, actually, it was in November, so it was year before last. And so there is a third cousin, because that's as close as I've actually gotten to my father so far. But I have seen family that looks like me,
Mm.
which has been interesting. But our grandmothers were sisters, so his grandmother is my father's mother's sister. Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, and
So
they,
you know your biological father,
well, no,
or no?
I've not ever met him. I know his name.
Okay.
Yeah, because my mom told me that. But yeah, so and then there's been someone, like I said, that I've been connected to on that I'm probably a surprise to because he was a married man, as
Yeah.
most GIs were at that
Right.
time,
Right.
in that
Yeah.
circumstance. And I never wanted to change anybody's life. I mean, I got lots of information back from my older sisters what a wonderful man my father was.
Mm.
Because like I said, my older sister is 10 years older than I, and so
Yeah.
they
She
remember him.
remembers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so he would come to visit our mother, and he would take them down to Würzburg to our grandmother's house, which was like 6 hours one way. And so they remember like his VW Beetle, and going through the countryside with him and stuff, and what a nice guy he was. And then all the other things that I heard about him, because he was an officer that had a radio show that had something to do with the nurses at the hospital, and that's how he met my mom, because
Oh.
after, yeah, my mother was in the hospital having a mental breakdown, and that's how he uh,
Wow.
wow, right? Yeah, man,
How'd
bip
you
bam
guys
boom,
meet?
Um, so I isn't that funny? I just find that fun. Like you
Mm,
never know where love is gonna find you, right?
no,
So,
right.
but yeah, that's how he met my mother. So
So jumping back
anyway,
real quick to,
yeah.
are you a citizen now? Like what
No,
happened?
I am, but no, I'm not. I don't have a so for me, what I found out for me is like I don't have to go through any formal naturalization. I just have to fill out a document and send a check for $1,500 to be a yeah to be
Wow.
a yeah, it's a certificate of citizenship. It's 15 pages long.
$1,500.
Yeah, yeah, so $100 a page, I assume. Yeah, but yeah, it's $1,500. Yeah, the two administrations ago, they changed the like all of the fees went up 95%.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it's just another way to marginalize
Yeah.
folks. So it's clear
Oh my gosh.
how some never get to that point, or they
Uh,
have to operate underneath it.
It's unbelievable.
It's just it's amazing. So and then of course all of those documents take about 15 months to get, it takes a while. Yeah. So yeah, but so that's how I ended up having a
Mm,
green card, and I shouldn't have one. And I've had
yeah.
one since 1991. And
Wow.
yeah, since 1990, and I've been here since 1968,
Yeah.
So
All because a piece of paper didn't get filled out
right,
back
yeah,
then.
exactly. And I mean, and I've had a passport, and that's the thing. When I went to the German consulate, that was before I got all of my documents translated, because I certainly have done all of that stuff. But the the woman at the consulate was just floored. Like she took about 25 minutes to read. She was like, had never in her tenure, she's not ever seen anything like this. And she's like, wow. And she said, well, she was like, we can't do anything for you. She said, because for one thing, they would have never issued you a passport if you weren't a citizen, you know?
Yeah, how'd you get the passport? I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. Yeah. And so, but so the thing is that as long as you have your passport, it can be an expired one. You can use that to apply for, it's no different than a driver's license. If you
mm-hmm.
need to renew it, you need different ID or whatever than if you lost it and you got to do it all over again. Or
Right.
maybe if you lost your privileges and you have to,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother ball of wax. You got to
Right.
present other documentation. Same thing here.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I don't know what, and it had been in the same place for decades. We moved, something happened. Oh no, it just mysteriously disappeared. But I've got the application for it. I've got the original picture. I've got the number. I've got all of that, and that's not enough. And so when I went to, because I had plans to travel in 2017, so that's how all of this came about with the State Department.
What did you
Um,
think when you
it
found that
took
out?
me
Like,
it took me
can't
27
imagine.
phone calls to the desk of the person that was processing because I'm not hearing anything. And I gave them everything I needed, because by this time I've done so much research. I know exactly what I need to have, and this is the situation. This is what you have to produce. So, I'm getting stuck in the normal channels of things instead of and I let them know, I'm like, hey, I've got travel plans. And I can come to DC. I would prefer not
Yeah.
to go to one of these satellite offices at the post office. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah. They're
Not
not going to be able to help you.
nothing against those folks,
No, but
but I
they're not
want to
going to
come to,
know.
yeah. And I was like, I can get to the State Department. I can come up there if I want to, and they were like, no, no, this will be fine. And of course it wasn't. And my
Mm-hmm.
stuff sat on an agent's desk for like 2 weeks because they didn't know what to do with it and didn't ask anyone. And I got
Wow.
to the bottom of all of that. It took me 27 phone calls because once I found out the telephone number to the customer service manager, the national customer service manager for the passport department at the, and after a bit, I was like, you know what, that's okay, because by that time my trip had come and gone. My friends had, like bought me 2 sets of tickets for other days and stuff. And I mean,
Oh my
it was just a big mess,
gosh.
And they were like, well, if we had known you had plans, like, yes, I had travel plans. Yes, I can. You know what? It doesn't even matter because I just made a case study out of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I said, you know what, this will come up again, and this is enough for me for now, but I'll be back.
Mm.
No, I didn't.
Wow.
And I was like, and I'll have some folks with me, and it just kind of happened. It wasn't like I did it by myself. It's just like we were talking about it and a need for like radical change at that, the different understanding, or we need to have representation um
Yeah.
also, and so what happened was we had the opportunity to sit down with the child welfare department of office of the U.S. Department of State, and
Mm.
so they're the ones that actually um, would have all of the rules in place for what do we do when we allow children to be adopted into nationally. We need to make sure that there is mental health coaching for anyone considering adoption, and this and
Mm.
this and that. So we all, so they were going to give us 30 minutes at first, 30 minutes,
30
and then
minutes.
125 of us signed up on this Zoom to speak, and they ended up giving us like 2 hours and 45 minutes or something like that. Everybody got 2 minutes,
Wow.
and they stayed on the line until, and so things have been changing like incrementally,
Mm.
and stuff. And we also have a direct line where we don't have to ask them things. We see when different international agencies are coming up for their renewal for their credentials, who lost their credentials. Oh, they
Mhm.
got them back on me. So get all of that, just comes in the email. We don't even have to ask. So, but they also let it, because again, none of us know. I mean, our lives have been so encapsulated. We don't know what information is helpful to someone else. So people are listening to our stories and they're like, oh my God, oh, so there's already something out there for that. People had no idea what resources were out there. If you
Yeah.
have these documents, this is an avenue you can take.
Right.
If you need this is where you need to go. They didn't even really know where just where
Mm-hmm.
stuff was being stored, or what was already out there that could help them in their circumstances. So conversations that were never had before have been happening ad
Yeah.
nauseum now, which is great, and
I just wonder
um,
how many people are out there that don't know that they're not a citizen right now.
well, yeah, and it's funny, not haha, but that's really when and you never find out at a convenient moment. It's not you're
Right.
just seeking self-edification. You find out because you're trying to do
You
something
need something.
important,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
and then and then you're like, oh, what? I mean, because it's gonna really be a mess when we move to the enhanced driver's license. Because of COVID, they
Yeah.
shut that down for like 2 years.
Yeah.
But in the next, definitely by 2025, I think everybody's got to have that. And some of us won't be able to get a real ID.
Wow.
And then you won't be able to even go to a state to state on
Yeah.
on the plane, you're not going to
Yeah.
be able to do that.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
but yeah, so it is, it's a very difficult, luckily for me, um, because people are doing all kinds of things. Some people are even having their adoptions annulled,
Yeah.
all kinds of things to help themselves circumnavigate the limits of the system.
Right.
And so I found so anytime you're thinking about anything like that, or having your case retried, like you can go before a judge. So I had to find out, well, I already knew which state I came stateside in, which was South Carolina. So I would have had to have gone to a judge in South Carolina and have them open my case again, and then so then I could petition for citizenship that way. And
Oh
so
my
I asked a
gosh.
lawyer, right? And lo and behold, he was adopted as well, from
Oh.
Germany as well,
Oh
and kind
wow.
of in similar situations. And he was like, yeah, no, Jackie. He's like, if we go this route, it might take 6 months before I can get you on the docket. It's going to cost you a lot of money, and it
So
still might
crazy.
not work. And he said, but in your situation, you say you don't need to do all this. He said, you just fill out a certificate of citizenship. Get yourself a couple of affidavits from your friend. I mean, I've had friends for years, Jackie, whatever you need. I'm like, people have known me since, I've had the same friends since 1968. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've got friends that I've had for 50 years. So they're like, yeah, sure. I mean, I still have nuns. I still have teachers alive. You know what I mean? That are like, yeah, Jackie, whatever,
Oh my
but it just,
gosh.
sometimes I just resent it and I just hate it. But now it's like, yeah, I know I need to do it and I'm going to do it within the next couple of months. But it really
Yeah.
hasn't affected my life at all, really. It's just that I do tend to stand on ceremony, but it actually became more of a thing of educating folks
Yeah.
I mean is really affecting their lives. I mean, I haven't really had my life affected anyway. You know what I mean? I sometimes I think I just like to whine and stomp about it, but I mean, I have a clear-cut path for my resolution, but a lot of people in my circumstance do not.
Yeah.
They're still struggling just to see. I mean, there are only 9 or maybe 10 states now in the United States will even allow that'll allow adoptees to even see an original birth certificate,
Yeah. I
you
can't.
know? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, and it's awful, to not have ownership of your own
Yeah.
identity, your own information.
Right.
So, do I need to turn light on? Do you need me to?
No, it's okay.
You're good. Okay.
Yeah,
All
we're
right.
good.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's turn it around and talk about some positive things
Oh,
here.
sure, sure.
So, just kind of a couple of things in closing. First thing, what would you say is your greatest achievement?
You know what was most important to me? It was important to me to couple well, to not have or create a similar experience like I had. Not that what I had wasn't great, but um, that at some point I was no longer the focus, and I think children should know. You know what I mean? Children should they should understand their place in the family and feel loved and supported and cherished and all of those things. And not that I didn't feel those things, but at some points I just felt like what I needed was not really there.
Mm.
But I'm certain that my greatest achievement was my ex-husband and I were we both had challenging childhoods, and we wanted to make sure that, none of the stuff that we were recovering from still, because we were still growing and
Yeah.
changing and stuff, even as parents. I mean, we really grew with our children. I mean, I mean, I was 21 years old when I met him, and then our first child came along when I was 24, and the second child came along when when I was 26, and he's 5 years older. So, I mean, we were pretty young,
Hmm.
I mean, not young as some, but for us, I mean, we
Yeah.
were. And we still had a lot of growing to do ourselves, and we wanted to make sure that our children were not affected by the things that affected our lives, and that our children knew the truth,
Yeah.
or so, and we were always honest with them about folks in our lives and stuff. And we were like, there's going to be something that you learn from everyone, even if it's how not to behave or how not to live or how, you know what I mean? So we were always quite honest, even when we recognized that our marriage was not going to last through all of this needed growth, we were honest with them about that too. We spent a lot of time in therapy, 6 weeks around just how to tell them
Mm.
and when to
Wow.
tell them. They're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
these are the things that are upsetting for children during divorce. So until you can answer these things, don't even approach the circumstance. I mean, and we made rules while we were with our therapist that we lived, by in between those visits and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
so it, and here we are like 21 years later, and I mean, we're still thick as thieves. We're highly effective parents and grandparents, and I mean, I'm nothing makes me happier than to see. I mean, my children are they're highly emotionally intelligent. They've got great relationships with their friends. Because those are hallmarks of it's like the plight of the adoptee is not necessarily either you having issues with attachment
Yeah.
or you can't attach at all,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and stuff. And so it makes me feel really good. Even my son married a woman that already had two children, and then they just had a child together about it's 18 months now, 18 months ago. And it's just been wonderful to, I mean, of course, as parents, initially we were like, okay, well, this is going to be a challenge. And my son was like, who better to deal with a situation like this than I? And I thought about it, and I'm like, yeah,
Mm.
he was
Yeah.
groomed for this. You know what I mean? And I mean, it's just wonderful to see. So,
Yeah.
definitely being able to do that and still, have we have mutual respect for each other. I mean, I would like my children even if they were not my children. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
good people, and it makes me feel really good. And it's nice that they still want me around. They still, you know what I mean? And that their dad and I are, we're in a cool place,
Yeah.
and I mean that's everything.
Yeah.
I think we're still here and family, but just redefined,
Yeah.
so.
Well, in closing, I always like to ask, what would you like struggling adoptees to know?
Well, that we're not alone, and that there is a lot of there's a lot of information out here. I mean, we're all starting to talk now. We're all um making this narrative more commonplace.
Hmm.
We weren't talking about things. We're just starting to see things show up in entertainment. We had the whole "This Is Us" on
Yeah.
television and stuff, which really was such a popular show, and it was it was cast well, it was written well. There was a lot of research that went into it because I
Hmm.
actually know one of the other adoptees that was probably consulted a lot for is this most like a true
Yeah.
experience and that kind of thing.
Wow.
So those things are really important. I mean, where before it was stigmatized, I mean, for the birth mother and for the, typically when we talk about it, or, the last few decades when we have been talking about it, we typically talk about it, or publicly it's talked about from the adoptive parent's perspective. Like I said before, I went to Catholic school all the way through, and I remember when I was in middle school, seventh grade to be exact, there was a girl that came. She lived in the convent for 2 years, I mean 2 weeks, and she came to class with us and everything. And this girl was pregnant. We were in the seventh grade.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and clearly, our school was in Southeast DC. We were a diverse bunch of kids, but it was clear that she was from somewhere else.
Mm.
So that we hear about that all the time. Folks would send their kids away for a while. Oh, she went to stay with an
Yep.
aunt in New Jersey and then come back and then go
Mm.
on with life. And it was the same thing. So nobody even talked about it. I mean, even at a reunion a few years ago, I asked one of my classmates' mothers, and I'm like, "Do you remember?" Because we were going through. You know how you take the pictures of the whole class, and everybody's like, "Who is that?" And I'm like, "That's that pregnant girl I was telling you guys about. She was in our class picture, and
Yeah.
stuff." And I was like, "Did the school ever call you and ask you if it was okay that this pregnant girl was in school with us?" I mean, we weren't even having sex education yet or anything,
Yeah.
and I mean, and that's just the way that was, such a huge deal. And we just didn't talk about those things. And I think now it's just becoming a more common
Yeah.
conversation, and I think a more thorough one than before. We would just kind of glaze over, oh, it's so happy.
Yeah.
And you really do need to take into account everyone's experiences, and
Definitely.
not to discount any of it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's it is not there is no shame in it, regardless of what you've ever been made to feel or anything that you've ever been told. I've not ever had that said to me or anything like that. I've not ever been treated that way in my family. I
Yeah.
just always felt different, but not because of it was just something that wasn't even discussed. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people even didn't know until I started talking about it, but I don't necessarily share details. My kids have grown to know all that they want to know. Um, but my family, I wait for them to come to me and ask me. They all know the deal, but
Yeah.
I feel like if you didn't ask me anything about it all these years, clearly you're not interested. You know what I mean? So it
Yeah.
is just something that I share with the other we adoptees, we refer to each other as crib mates, and so I probably share more in the adoptee community than I do in my own family,
Right.
for obvious reasons,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
not something. I mean, some folks feel differently about it. Sometimes they feel like you're a traitor, or you're no longer loyal to us, or is some kind of disloyalty to the family to, to
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
so I'd rather not even entertain that, because I know that not to be true.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah. So,
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Jackie, and educating us on this whole thing. I had no idea, about the citizenship thing. And so if
yeah.
somebody's wondering they're a citizen, how can they find out?
Well, let's see. Well, the first thing you could do is try to apply for a passport, or um apply for financial aid, apply to the military, or um register to vote. That's
Mm,
probably the easier thing. Or
okay.
try to renew a driver's license. I mean,
Yeah.
that's typically when you're going to find out, especially now. It's going to be the driver's license thing, because then they're going to be asking for a um
Yeah.
a birth certificate or whatever, and that's usually an issue one way or the other for an adoptee.
Yeah.
Um
Okay.
another thing I didn't know is that the Social Security card, like if you can't if you have a Social Security card but you're not capable of working yet, so you can have a Social Security card but not have a green card. So if you have a Social Security card, it'll say on the front of it, not good for employment or something. There's a
Oh,
stamp on it. Like I'd never
wow.
never knew that.
I didn't
And
either.
most people that handle I-9 documents don't know that either. And
Wow.
yeah, and so yeah, so it's interesting how these documents work independent of each other. And lots of people don't know the scope of the usage of each one of those documents.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's typically one of those things
Okay.
where you know, or you get fingerprinted for. Um, well, that's not true because I was fingerprinted. You know, I was, but that's because again, I was considered a citizen. That's why I was given a passport. You know, so it was not until I applied for. Well, that's not true. I tried to travel outside of the country once. And they were like, yeah, no,
Wow.
you know, that's when I recognized my birth certificate was not the same. Well, I mean, I knew
It's
the
different.
German birth certificate, but I'm like, but this is my husband. And they were like, yeah, no, we're not letting you get on that plane. You know what
Oh
I
my
mean? And stuff.
gosh.
Yeah, my plane, had to wait for my bags to come back because my bags went on the trip, but I didn't, you know.
Oh,
But it was a couple
so
years later
crazy.
when I tried to get the my Social Security card updated, and they were like, no, where's your I-9 document or this or that? And I'm like, well, I don't
What's
have any of
that?
those things, you know.
What is that?
Yeah, you know, and so that's how, like I said, it was just easier when I did go to the immigration at that time,
Mhm.
because I was looking to be able
Yeah.
to work again, you know, like, and it's not like I'd already had corporate jobs, I'd already
Right.
been to college and everything, but it was just different, you know, because until the conversation comes up, and oh, and you're trying to change your last name, or okay, so you need this and you need that, and where's
Yeah.
this document? And I'm like, I have no idea what that is. You
Wow.
know, so
Yeah.
yeah, so you have to do something.
Yeah.
I figure apply for a passport is probably the easiest thing.
Okay.
And then I've also found that if they do, and during their own due diligence, if they find out that you are a citizen, I mean, or whatever, they'll just give you the passport. They won't,
Mm.
you know, sometimes that happens. I don't think that ever happens for us. But, you know, sometimes people tell you to do that, you know.
Yeah.
I've heard that. Just apply for, you know, let them tell you no. Let them tell like,
Yeah.
okay. But
Yeah.
essentially, you have to fill out the consular report of birth abroad initially, and then the child has to be naturalized or some kind of final measure
Hmm.
right after that.
Yeah.
But if not, if those things are, and like I said, no one
Yeah.
was coaching the parents to do those
Right.
things.
Right.
And if parents are already, and you know, if you could just imagine that their lives are getting ready to change, and they're going on, you know, and they're handling because they felt like, well, the military gave us this, and she's good. Here we go. This is her passport, and this
Yeah.
and that. But I remember I did have a naturalization card, and it was stolen. My mom's purse, she left a little thing at the bank, and I remember that. So, and then that was never replaced, and that
Mm.
was the issue for me, was
Okay.
not having a naturalization card,
Yeah.
you know, and stuff. And so, and I didn't find out about it until later, much later. So
Well, thanks so
that's
much
kind of what
for
it.
coming on
Mhm.
and educating us all today and
Absolutely.
telling your story, Jackie. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Another great story helping us educate the world about adoption. You know, some of these stories are just so crazy, and it just feels like someone's telling me about a movie plot. Like when Jacquelin was saying that her mother and her escaped an abusive relationship, and she basically went into hiding and built a whole new life. And her mother was such a warrior back in those times. To be able to stand on her own 2 feet and do all the things that she did is just amazing. All the amazing stories and people that I get to meet, and I get to bring those stories to you, and it is just a privilege for me to do that. So So thank you, Jacquelin, for coming on the show today. I just want to say real quick, Mind Your Own Karma is coming up on 2 years old. And I was on Apple Podcasts the other day and I noticed that I'm almost at 50 reviews. I am 4 away, and my goal before we turn 2 years old is to get to that 50 reviews. So if you have been on the podcast, you've been listening to the podcast, but you haven't rated and reviewed the podcast yet, I would ask you to help me reach this 50 goal and go on to Apple Podcast, leave a review for me. And if you do, and you want to be entered for 3 free SMGI sessions, just send me a DM either on Facebook or Instagram, or email me at mindyourownkarma@gmail.com and let me know you would like to be entered into the contest. That's it for today's episode. And as always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.